Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Voice of Authority webinar. My name is Toby Fox, and I'm the Managing Director at 3Fox, the marketing agency for councils. Our job is to keep the network of public and private sector organisations connected during coronavirus, and we're doing that through a series of webinars. We're brought to you this morning by Inner Circle Consulting. The Voice of Authority platform is set up to provide local authorities with an opportunity to discuss their ambitions, their challenges, their influences and issues of urgency. And today that issue is community wealth building. What is it really? You're a local authority and you want to encourage growth as a means of local economic prosperity. Indeed, the policy incentives mean that you need to encourage growth to fund the crucial services you provide. But not growth at any cost. You want to be sure that local people are benefiting from development, investment, change. You've heard some councils talking about inclusive growth, others espousing community wealth building. How do these phrases and the strategies behind them translate into action? Because it's action we need. It's pretty clear that the economy isn't working for everyone. And I think almost all of us would agree on that. It isn't working for the planet either. And we could probably develop a consensus on where we want to get to. But getting there, that's the hard bit. When we were discussing this session with Inner Circle, we agreed that success for us an hour from now is some local authority viewers leaving the session intent on adjusting your recovery strategies to be a little bit more about building a better economy and a little bit less about reinforcing the pre-COVID norms. And some private sector viewers leaving with an understanding of what local authorities might expect of you and the role you can play and what you might expect of them in building a world that is better than it was at the beginning of this landmark year, this epical year. How are we going to do that? Through the sheer power of our panel to inspire and embolden you. No pressure, panel. First, our panelists are going to demystify some of the concepts, and then they're going to ground those concepts in some examples of local action with which to inspire you. And what examples? We couldn't ask for a better panel to stimulate and energize us all this morning. It's a great pleasure to introduce, in alphabetical order, Joanne Drew, who is Director of Housing and Regeneration at the London Borough of Enfield. Nabeel Khan, who's Director of Enterprise, Jobs and Skills at the London Borough of Lambeth. Nick Kimber, who's Head of Inclusive Economy at London Borough of Camden. And of course, Jamie Unan, who is Director at Inner Circle Consulting, our sponsors today. Together, they're going to rouse you. They're going to galvanize you. And perhaps they're even going to goad you into action. We expect and we encourage questions from the audience. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screens to submit and vote for questions so that we can put the most popular ones to our panel in about half an hour. We're also going to be loading some snap polls onto your screens during the session, and your responses to those can help fuel our conversation and provide material for the report on the session afterwards. But before we get to that, I'm going to hand over to Jamie to set the scene. So, Jamie, what's the context for this discussion? Where does the community wealth building concept originate? It seems to sort of suddenly come to the fore in the last year. Is that the case? And if so, why?
Yeah, morning, Toby. Morning, everybody. I think it's been around for a little while now. The fact that the economy is not working for everybody has been around for a little while. The COVID has brought it into sharp focus. It's the levels of inequality have changed. Who are the wealth creators? Who are the people that add value has changed. So it's a good opportunity now. There's a window open for discussion where some of these ideas can be brought on. So what is it a good time to start sharing a deck of slides, Toby?
Absolutely.
And people through it? Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Go ahead.
So I'm pretty, so I brought this motley crew together with Toby, because I think these are the guys that are delivering on, seriously in the front line for local government. Underpinning a lot of their work, or perhaps overpinning a lot of their work, are some fairly serious economic concepts. And then you've got some strange language, as always, in the world of regeneration and public policy. And you've got these things like donut economics and community wealth building and so on and so forth. And I thought what I wanted to do is frame the situation for them. I'm pretty certain that we can all agree around that the economy is not working, and we can probably all agree around a bit of a vision that we want to get to. How you get there, that's the art of delivery. And so at that point I'm going to hand over to the people at the who are working in councils, who are our partners over time. So the economy, the economy is not working. It's a job, any job, is no longer a route out of poverty, which would have been unthinkable years ago. But there is in work poverty, and has been for quite some time, quite some years now. A rising tide does not lift all boats. We've found that. So, and productivity remains poor. Living standards are staggeringly low for thousands and thousands of people. So several people have had a go at the overarching concept. So the RSA, who bastion of forward thinking in public policy, they have looked at the current model and said, inclusive growth is about bringing together the economic models and the social models. It's about enabling more people and places to contribute and to benefit from economic success. It's about how poverty can be reduced through the creation of better jobs, better access to those jobs, for those people that are in poverty or at risk of poverty. So they posit underneath this old model into new model 4 or 5 principles in there. So they talk about creating a shared mission, and that's a common narrative that all can get behind. And you'll begin to see that some of these, there are patterns in these different models, that we're talking about. So this inclusive growth one's about creating a shared mission. It's about measuring human experience of growth, and not just the rate of growth. So that's about the access to the jobs, the quality of jobs. That's about measuring well-being, not just GDP growth or GVA. So there are different measures of success that they're positing is a principle of inclusive growth. Seeing growth as a whole system and not just a machine. And that being, and the public sector being an agile investor at scale. So deploying finance and investment into the right infrastructure, focusing on preventative actions rather than crisis. A lot of the work in Barking and Dagenham and some of that has been about, again, tackling issues of poverty very early on. So they will, if someone's looking like they might not be paying their rent, they don't go after them with a big stick to pay their rent. They are trying to understand what's the circumstances these guys are in. Are there things that we can do to prevent them coming into this moment of crisis, personal crisis? And then there's about public sector innovation and investment, and I'll come on to that with one of the other models. And then they're about entrepreneurial leadership. So city leaders being leaders of this inclusive growth. So they've got 4 or 5 components that they capture as called inclusive growth. You've then got, title of the presentation is community wealth building. Now that originated over in the US, democracy collaboration, and in the United States. They had 8 principles. In the UK, we boil it down to 4. There's one particularly good consultancy called Claire's who've been pushing this agenda for a very long time. There's the Preston model, and that Preston model looks at these 4 things. So it's harnessing the wealth that is there. So harnessing the power of the money that the anchor institutions are spending. So that's anchor institutions, councils, higher education, universities, etc. So that people are anchored in the place. They are spending money. Their budgets run into the hundreds of millions. How are they using that money? What are they procuring? How are they procuring those goods? So that money does not get extracted into another place, but stays in the local economy. Investing in the workforce is another component that fits underneath here in the UK model. That is about maximising the skill of the staff, and paying living wages, paying more than living wages. So you've got harnessing the wealth that's there, skill of the workforce, investing in that. Land and property investments, so utilising the anchor institutions' lands and assets to leverage further investment, and it may possibly even redistributing the ownership of some of those community assets into the communities where that's appropriate. So again, you've got this harnessing the wealth that's there, the skilled workforce that you're creating, the land and property, and then economic democracy. So that's new models of democracy. So you're getting into cooperative models. So community wealth building has four components. In the UK model, but all coming from the fact that the economy is broken and not working for everybody. Then you've got a more visual model, yeah, created by Kate Raworth. So she talks about donut economics, yeah, and so this again comes from the same critique of the economy's not working, but the hole in the middle is shown about those without. So this is where there's a shortfall. There's a shortfall in education, shortfall in health. There's, there is a hole in the middle, and again, people are falling into that hole. Thousands of people fit in that hole. But however, we can't let our resources, the use of our resources, go beyond the outer edge of this donut, beyond the outer green part of this donut. Otherwise, you're getting into damaging the planet, overshooting. So this donut economics brings in this idea of the economy working for the planet as well as working for the people. So under this, she talks about economies that thrive, whether growth or not, actually. Is there a model? We don't have to go after this continuous growth, this continuous GDP growth. She talks about economies that restore and regenerate by design, and economies that redistribute by design. So she's getting into concepts of circular economy. One of the projects that Inner Circle worked on recently up in the Bun Hill area of Islington, where we took the heat from the tube, the underground system, and fed that into local housing, local community housing. Again, so you're reusing the heat. So it's kind of circular economy stuff. So that is in there. But of course, she's talking about it on a grand scale, on a city scale. Yeah. So, and it's quite a visual. It's a visual technique to say, let the hole in the middle, people fall through, and then the edge. Don't overshoot. And finally, and I'd put this as one of my final slides because I know Camden are working with. You've got Mariana Mazzucato, who's an economist in UCL, set up a whole department about public innovation in the UCL. So like others, she probably explains most comprehensively the problem with measuring GDP, and she tells funny stories about how if you marry your babysitter, your GDP goes down, and if you pollute, your GDP goes up, because someone has to pay to kind of take it away. So it shows that it's to be a very odd measurement of success. So she talks about the shortcomings of large corporations failing to invest in R&D. They were preferring to look at forms of wealth extraction like share buybacks. So that's stopping. That's breaking the myth that these large companies are where all the R&D comes from. She likes to put it back that the public sector is much more important to R&D than perhaps we once thought, and she puts challenges back to us all. How can we generate more R&D? So, and again, she talks about the NASA moon landings, and it wasn't just aeronautics that were advanced there. There was nutrition, material science, etc., and that was all from the power of procurement. As you see again, another pattern there, the power of procurement. If we can get the public sector and the private sector together, set the mission through a bit of procurement, set the right conditions where actually you can experiment through procurement and encourage trial and error, which isn't a done thing in the public sector over here. You get major steps in innovation. So and again, she talks about deals with companies. So AT&T, when they were the monopoly in the US, the US government set them a kind of set of conditions that said you've got to reinvest a certain amount of your profit into R&D if we're going to allow you to be the monopoly. So she created a kind of quid pro quo with all of these characters, and she'll go on. The BBC is in the UK is one of our institutions where we co-create markets and co-create content. So there's lots of private sector companies all being encouraged to innovate to provide content from the BBC. So you've got four concepts here. You've got the concept of inclusive growth, articulated perhaps best by the RSA. You've got the concept of community well-being. You've got the concept of donut economics, and then you've got this concept of the entrepreneurial state, all of which positing that the economy is broken, and all of which are suggesting there is a moment in time. All of which are saying that we should be purpose focused, mission focused, not pricing focused or other economic things, purpose focused. We should be absolutely mindful at every stage to go beyond this simple grow and redistribute model. And then central to that is the public sector. And I think once you start understanding, okay, central to that is the public sector, you do start asking the questions of what are the other actors. So I think it's again, as the rest of the team here will explain to you what they're doing in a local area. You've got what does the state and the government do? What about the other institutions and the communities? And then what about our private sector listeners? And hopefully this is what we will get out of this session: some practical ideas about what we can all be doing to build community wealth. Yeah. So that's me.
The idea of encouraging trial and error in procurement, I know as a concept that will have pricked up a few ears. I don't think I've had a conversation with anyone in the private sector in the last 6 months who hasn't mentioned the word procurement. While the government's focusing on planning, maybe that's an area that would unlock develop more quickly than the current planning reforms. But let's ground some of that concept now with some of our case studies. Turning to you, Nick, in Camden, the Centre for Local Economic Strategies that Jamie mentioned, Claire's, they say that community wealth building involves public sector organisations ensuring inclusivity in procurement, in harnessing land, in property and assets for public good, and ensuring that ownership in the economy is more local and more empathic to social and environmental needs. How's Camden delivering those aims?
Yeah, thanks. So I want to build a little bit on what Jamie's just talked about, the model that UCL have developed, and this concept of the entrepreneurial or active state. So I think most people would agree that we want to renew rather than recover. So that implies recovery implies a return to the status quo ante, whereas we want renewal to imply a new direction, so a conscious movement towards something new and better. I think one of those really important sources of renewal, and arguably an unexpected one, is the state. So not just the state, kind of a range of local, public and private sector organisations which are focused on creating value, but the state being a kind of really important and often kind of neglected part of that discussion. So we're working with UCL and Mariana specifically on a commission which looks at the economic impacts of COVID on Camden, but also the wider London economy, and what our long-term strategy should be, but also about some kind of key sectoral arguments about things like public sector capability, public sector procurement, and mission-based approaches. So the work's kind of anchored in a couple of key concepts. So one is about the way mainstream economics and public management thinks about the role of the public sector, which is largely about it being reactive. Its role is to kind of fix markets when they go wrong, fill in the gaps and help people who fall through the nets or places that get left behind. And colleagues at UCL would argue that the public sector should actually be at the centre of the economy, and the public sector plays a role in creating and shaping markets with the private sector, and it can and should set direction, and historically has been an investor of first resort. So when you look at early stage pharmaceutical investment in the 50s and 60s, when you look at the development of the internet, all of the early stage investment has been taken on by the public. So rather than sort of crowding out investment, it can crowd in innovation and create a more fertile environment for economic growth. And we talked at the beginning about missions, and then those are kind of a key way that you can create that direction. So the classic example is the moon landing, where the state sets a strategic goal that's ambitious but realistic, but kicks off a cross-sector process of innovation. And that is something that I think that can be replicated at the city level and in the London context, the sub-city level. And that's the sort of work that we're engaged in with UCL. I think all of us on the call have certainly kind of local authority colleagues have a very direct recent experience of what the public sector can do when they have a mandate. So Camden mobilised a team of 2,000 volunteers to roll out services to combat hunger, to support businesses, to tackle educational disparities. Within 7 weeks, we'd delivered more than 100,000 meals. We'd developed a £3 million hardship fund. We all have our own version of that story, and we're all engaged in work now to safely reopen our high streets and create confidence. So we've demonstrated that we're really good in a crisis, but with resources and mandate, arguably we could do more in shaping the next phase of the crisis and actively shaping rather than responding. So I think there's a couple of ways, some of which have been mentioned already, that kind of I'll call out, and then I'll talk specifically about some work that Camden's doing as a sort of source for inspiration and provocation. So there's definitely something about investment in support for business in the form of enterprise support, loans, grants, but investment with conditionality. So when we're talking about renewal rather than recovery, for me, that's really important. So support needs to come with a contract around improving access to work, improving the quality of work, not just work itself. Rightly, we've talked already about jobs not being the answer, and traditional measures of economic growth, both national and local, not being kind of sufficient. I think there's also something about the focus on the foundational economy, so not just high value traded goods and services. So we really need to interrogate the quality of jobs that are created by traditional economic development strategies, and think about kind of core sectors like health and care, social care markets, who they employ, how they employ. Procurement, workforce, huge roles, as we've talked about. Also, and there are colleagues better placed on the panel to talk about this than me, but kind of an active role in creating housing supply, which I think is an important and essential role for the sector over the coming years. And then what I'll talk about a little bit more is around as a provider of services, I guess, and a role in reimagining the welfare state and how people navigate services and support themselves into good work. All of that kind of activity, I think, is really important to say this requires investment and capability. So government capability in the UK has been denuded at a local and national level over a period of 10 years or more. An often cited example is in the public sector is around the number of practicing architects. So in the early 1970s, 49% of architects were working in the public sector. Today, that's 1%. So the ability to sort of conceptualize and client work is far reduced because of that. Our ability to make linkages between, say, the built environment and public health is far reduced because of that. And when we see colleagues from around London beginning to develop kind of really innovative responses to the housing supply crisis, there are some fairly significant barriers, and capability is the key one. So the ability to finance programs, also the resources to bring in the types of skills that they need to create the value that intuitively we know that we can create, and indeed there's evidence that we can create it. So Camden Examples, I think, which talk to at least some of that. We've got a program which is in its early stages called Good Work Camden. So its aim is to do exactly that, to increase the supply of quality work for Camden residents. And its focus is, in a Camden context, on access to employment, which leads people to live fulfilling lives. Camden's a dynamic economy. Hopefully will continue to be a dynamic economy. So the challenge for us is less around sort of stimulating demand and more around turning that into value for local citizens. Conscious it will be a different challenge for other colleagues. There's kind of three kind of key bits to that. So the first is around how we support people into employment. So we have an approach called the neighbourhood approach, which is a relational asset-based approach to employment support, which is really strongly rooted in neighbourhoods, provides additional capacity in the employment support system, but it's kind of a counterpoint to the JCP model. So it's got really strong reach into BAME communities, works really closely with the organised VCS, co-designed and is iteratively designed and developed with citizens based on kind of what we learn. Very much a kind of at the school gates and in the ball pool of the soft play type model. And its measures of success are kind of different. So yes, about entry into job and sustainment into job, but a really important measure for us is the quality of the relationship between the client, the candidate, and our work coaches. So that our hypothesis is that the thing that is ultimately that drives outcomes, progression, including entry into jobs, and that's the thing that operationally we measure, and really strong relationships between those functions and local businesses. The second element is around how we work with our business community. So this is called inclusive business, and essentially it's a network of employers and institutions which are focused on improving employment practices. So it takes the Mayor's Good Work standard, which I think is a really strong piece of policy work, but tries to operationalise that. So building a alliance of employers who will want to change their practice so that they recruit in a different way, in a way that's more accessible, that reaches out to communities who sometimes find it difficult to move into work, that ensures that people are supported once they're in work to progress, raise appropriate terms and conditions, And importantly, what it does is rather than just creating a sort of a narrative and telling stories and exhorting the private sector and anchor institutions to change, it provides interventions. So networking people, providing really practical tools. So not just a 25-page PDF which tells you about the business case for flexible working, but 3 clicks and you're through to a form which helps you redesign a job, which means that it becomes accessible to a resident with learning disabilities, or indeed any resident who's just baffled by job descriptions which put people off. To direct advice from the council and anchor institutions, so kind of a mutual aid aspect to that, where organisations with significant HR departments can help a busy SME who wants to do all of this stuff but absolutely can't because the HR advice they have is on retainer, it's expensive, and they use it for business critical things rather than job design. So it's an important proactive intervention into how we can shape a fairer labour market, but also support businesses to thrive and prosper and improve their productivity. The last thing that I'll talk about in the context of the programme is around kind of digital services. So I think this is a really important thing to support residents in London to be able to navigate employment and skills services. It's an unbelievably confusing system. It isn't digitally enabled, whole range of different providers and no sort of clear entry point into the system. So one of the things that we are doing and are going live in September is a platform designed, with a great deal of kind of primary research with users to allow them to kind of be effectively signposted to apprenticeships, to training opportunities, to the new Kickstart scene, and eventually to kind of develop that as the way in which people enter and are supported through employment services in Camden. So the ability to do kind of casework and co-designed action plans, all of which is kind of digitally enabled, much more efficient and capable of scale. So something that would be replicated kind of across London with kind of a common front door, but with a range of different services and different approaches that kind of sit beneath that. So those things together, I suppose, are the beginning of our kind of more proactive and interventionist approach to supporting Camden people to access good work. And the commission that we're doing with UCL will build on and extend that, and allow us to think more kind of fundamentally about planning gain and who benefits from that. How we can develop risk and reward approaches, which mean that we can share the benefits of supporting people into work with central government, and leverage an additional investment into a system which isn't properly funded at the minute.
Great stuff, Nick. Thank you very much indeed for that. Some really interesting concepts in there, that measuring the quality of relationships and how you get into that sort of granularity. Be fascinating. And I've got a load of questions that your piece has raised there. Our audience is keeping their powder dry. No questions yet, but we're going to get to your questions in about sort of 10 minutes, audience. So start firing them in. Now let's have a look at this whole concept from a different angle, from the point of view of a regeneration project. Joanne, Meridian Water is, to say the least, a landmark scheme, incredible scale, the council taking considerable control within it. How are you ensuring that the outcomes at Meridian Water will build the local community's wealth? And where are the quick wins and where does it become sort of most difficult?
Okay, thanks, Toby. I will talk about Meridian Water because clearly it's a fantastic scheme and a really important regeneration opportunity for the borough. But what I also wanted to do is to talk about Enfield Council's journey on a broad inclusive growth agenda. It really is at the top of our focus. I've been with the council for coming up 2 years now, and it's been a great privilege to work as we shape the kind of corporate environment to make inclusive growth at the heart of what we do. So if I can put Meridian Water in context of that would be really helpful. So in terms of us as a borough, we are capable of delivering significant growth over the next decade and beyond. with over 19,000 additional homes, supporting infrastructure and thousands of jobs. Now, 2/3 of this will be enabled or delivered directly by the borough, either through our master developer role on the landmark Meridian Water site, or through our direct delivery council house building and regeneration programmes. So it makes Enfield a dynamic place to live and work, but right now it's also a place of really poor outcomes for many of our residents. So perceptions that Enfield is a leafy green borough would be wrong today. I really need to stress that. It has the problems of inner London with the funding and infrastructure of outer London. So extreme deprivation feature in the east of the borough and in the broader Edmonton area specifically, and that sits alongside the relative affluence in the west. So in order to help try and identify solutions to address the root cause of the problem, our leader commissioned a Poverty and Inequality Commission, and that focused on the themes of living, learning and earning. This generated 27 recommendations for change to make a difference to families on the lowest incomes. Now, these actions have this year informed a new corporate plan so that inclusive growth runs throughout the council's priorities. At the same time, we were writing our housing and growth strategy, and this includes a housing test for what good growth looks like, so that all our housing and regeneration schemes need to demonstrate that they're affordable for Enfield residents, that they're safe and good for health and well-being, that they're inclusive for all, environmentally sustainable and digitally connected. So we then have a development strategy. As I say, we're very committed to direct delivery of development, and this is supported, and the point was made earlier about the public sector's role in investment in its economy. So this is supported by £950 million of investment over the next 10 years. Now, that's been possible as a result of the lifting of the HRA debt cap and our ability to create a new financial framework that we can support that level of investment. So that means that we can deliver homes that existing residents need and that the market is just not providing at the rate we need. So in particular, family homes at affordable rent levels and adapted homes. We hope that this will be through local SME builders that we've been supporting over the last year with capacity building to play a real part in this role. On Meridian Water, the first affordable homes will be council owned, and they're going to be prioritised for local people. And intermediate housing is going to be provided for local key workers. We've also been looking at how important resident services can be brought back in-house within the direct control of the council. So it's been a busy year, but this year we've also insourced our council housing repairs service. Now that has provided a great opportunity for our councillors and residents to input into the service model, and a great opportunity to hold us to account for delivery of that kind of high volume, large scale service that is so important to many of our residents. So the next step from that, and obviously we're in the early stages, but we have an idea that we want to build up our capacity so that that can enable us to take a more direct role in construction delivery. This would link to our Skills Academy, which is going to be established on the Meridian Water site, and it'll help create more routes for residents to access the construction sector. So with the direct delivery role goes a need for capital investment. So despite the pandemic, and I guess everyone in the public sector at the moment is looking really hard at how we can balance the books, but we are looking really carefully at our capital programme. We're really keen that we sustain that capital investment in the borough this year. So pre-pandemic, we had a programme of 450 million this year, mostly related to housing regeneration activity. So we want to sustain that investment because we know it will drive the economy and it will deliver some social value outcomes, which we are aiming to direct towards employment and skills, which is so important in the current environment. In Enfield, we have the 5th highest number of residents that have been furloughed. So we are anticipating real impacts on the employment in the borough. So whilst in terms of community wealth building, we're delivering a range of initiatives directly because it's part of our leadership role, but it's also part of our role to spread the message and encourage the practice with our partners who are co-creators in this endeavour. So some examples of things we've been doing. So we've been enabling the whole community to be part of the solution on homelessness. Now we have the highest level of evictions from the private rented sector in the country, and the second highest number of residents in temporary accommodation to Newham. We have more residents in temporary accommodation than the whole of the West Midlands, so we've got a real problem. But we wanted to make homelessness part of the whole community's response. So we've supported with a social enterprise called Beam, a crowdfunding platform which enables the community to donate to campaigns to support homeless people, to enable them to access training and routes to employment. So it's a great way of safely being able to harness the community's support for homeless people. We're also supporting the voluntary sector to play a greater role. Obviously the voluntary sector over recent years has been really affected by austerity, but they can touch residents and communities in ways that local government can't. So we've really been supporting them to play a role in homelessness upstream prevention, because that's part of our new service model for the homelessness area. We want to shift away from the kind of traumatic crisis presentation focus that has become the norm in homelessness services. So we really see the voluntary sector playing a role on that. We're also developing an RP framework, because whilst we are committed to direct delivery, we can't do everything ourselves, and we need to ensure we've got the right level of expertise as part of our strategies. So we'll have a framework where we will call on specialist expertise, for example, housing associations that can help us meet the needs for older residents, independent living, big agenda to prevent the escalation of adults' social care costs in the future. They also have some great expertise in community development and investment in communities that we'd like to harness. So RPs have a role in the borough. Also, it's been mentioned the really important role of the private sector and the business sector. So they will continue to be an important part of working with the borough. They do have skills and resources for delivery that we need, but that will be clearly within our thinking of what a good growth framework is. We've just launched a design competition, really great, to find models of intergenerational living to increase the diversity of housing in Enfield. And we hope that that will support the local SME sector and BAME architects in particular. So lots of things that we're doing to kind of influence change, but we also recognise that there's a national policy environment and a system that we need to make work better for Enfield residents. So we see ourselves as a lobbying council, and we do lobby on issues that are really important in this space. So for example, we've been calling on all government departments to review the funding formulas to account for the emerging geographical patterns of increased poverty and deprivation that we are seeing in outer London boroughs such as Enfield. We've also been working with the GLA to build a strategic partnership to tackle the severe deprivation in the broader Edmonton area, which is on the east of the borough. And working collaboratively together with the GLA, we hope to make place-based funding really impactful alongside policy and operational interventions so that we can make a lasting change to that area. So in kind of closing, I would just sort of like to say that in order to make inclusive growth work, from a local authority perspective, I think it needs to be part of the DNA of the council. And that starts with the leadership and the culture, the way people think about their roles and what's important. And I think it's also a recognition that inclusive growth is the job of every local government officer and the way it works with our partners and the community. So it's part of the day job for local government today.
Brilliant stuff, rousing stuff. Thank you very much indeed, Joanne. That's fantastic. And playing into some of the questions coming from the audience around how you make connections and build capacity within SMEs. You're already playing into some of the themes that seem to be developing on the Q&A there. And also, you mentioned the sort of changing levels and changing patterns of deprivation. And I was speaking to one council this week that was talking about, an outer London council was talking about a working age population of a little over 150,000 residents and a population on furlough of 50,000. So that's 1/3 of all their working age residents currently on furlough. And you can see, I mean, we all hope that that furlough ends in the most positive way it can, but you can see how that might lead to a huge change in the sort of levels of deprivation we're seeing in outer London suburbs. And they were the third worst affected, not even the first worst affected. Nabeel, in Lambeth, all of this kind of begs the question, doesn't it? You know, if growth doesn't work, is growth necessary? We've been talking. Nick mentioned earlier about the importance of measuring the quality of a relationship. If as long as we're measuring growth by GDP and measuring prosperity and success by GDP, maybe we can never be successful in making an economy that works for everyone. Do we need growth to be prosperous?
Wow, what a question! Thanks, Toby. I mean, let me just start by saying I agree with everything that Joanne and Nick and Jamie were saying. Let me directly respond to your question. Do we need growth to build community wealth? I think from where we sit as a borough today, yes, we need growth. I think that's the honest answer. We are facing a £28 million in-year funding gap this year. That's the gap between what we've spent on dealing with the sort of COVID response over the last 5 months and what we're going to be reimbursed for by central government, and that's just at this point in time. So that doesn't take into account the additional costs that we're going to continue to incur. When I finish this call, actually, funny enough, I'm jumping on in a meeting with my management team talking about savings proposals that we need to put forward for our sort of budget planning exercise in September. So, I mean, why am I telling you this? I suppose to make the point that we have very limited options when it comes to doing things differently. We can tweak around the edges, we can optimize our service delivery, we can get imaginative with our engagement processes. Ultimately, though, we work within a system at the moment, a system that is the most centralized democratic state in the world, a system that has seen 60% reduction in local government budgets over the last decade, a system where we as a city, London this is, retain only 7% of the taxes that we raise, compared to 50% in New York and 70% in Tokyo, other comparator world cities. My entire team, who sort of focus on social regeneration, job skills, enterprise and investment, etc., are fully funded by developer contributions. Fully funded. We don't get any core council funding. So without proactively attracting inward investment and without getting spades in the ground, I and my team can't do the good stuff that we want to do in order to tackle inequality, to reduce poverty, to increase opportunity. So I think I just want to sort of make that point up front. It is linked to the point that Nick was making about system and sort of our role as a local authority and how it's been diminished over the years. But look, that's an overly pessimistic opening, and I'm a natural optimist. So let me pivot to what we can do and what we have done. And it's this is a rather timely discussion actually, because as of this morning, we as a borough have just launched our economic resilience strategy, as we're calling it, and in it, we state our ambition to create an inclusive and resilient economy in Lambeth. And we're very intentional about our priority groups in there. So particularly our Black Caribbean, our Black African, our Black Somali, and our Portuguese residents. I mean, before this crisis, we were preparing a growth strategy for the borough, which championed economic growth, but not only to secure funding to deliver our essential public services, but also to explicitly recognize the biases and barriers facing some in our communities. Simply getting back, and this is to echo, I suppose, what Joanne, Nick, and Jamie have been saying, simply getting back to where we were before won't address those inequities and won't build the resilient economy that we need if the folk of Lambeth are to fulfil their potential. So this crisis just increases that challenge for us, really. And leaving aside the perennial sort of underfunding issue, because I could speak at length about that. We as local authorities do have tremendous levers at hand. If we can learn to push and pull them in synchronicity with our sort of growth ambitions and our partner expectations, I genuinely believe this can be a win-win. And I'll give you three examples of
what I think are inclusive growth in action over the past couple of years. So exhibit 1, I want to present International House. So I don't know how many of your audience know about International House. It's an 11-story office block located in central Brixton. It's owned by us as a council. It used to house our children and adult social services. Like many 1970s blocks, it became somewhat surplus to requirements. But rather than sell it off or convert it to resi, we made a decision a couple of years ago to offer it as meanwhile space and interim use to house local startups, and in particular our social enterprises. We've got a really strong social economy in Lambeth. We're really proud of them. We want to cultivate them, and we sort of wanted to give them a central sort of place, really. So we procured an operator, 3Space, to manage it for us, and they've done a fantastic job. I mean, really forward-looking organisation, and full marks to Harry and Andrew there. They deserve all the credit for turning it into London's largest affordable workspace, and also having it recognised as the first living wage building in the country. So all 300 tenants of International House are obliged to pay at least a London living wage to their employees and their contractors. And there's a fabulous sort of buy, give, work model that they operate, which is novel, equitable, and sustainable. And it's not often that you can find those 3 elements ticked off in one project. So I really would encourage your sort of viewers to sort of check that out, because it's a great sort of model of inclusive growth in action. And actually, furthermore, it actually underpinned our affordable workspace policy, which we adopted earlier this year. So it led to policy change for us as well. So that's exhibit 1. Exhibit 2, planning obligations, and in particular our skills and employment ask. So we are very intentional about how we optimize the opportunities that are created through our developments. Currently, we've got 22 sites, live sites across the borough. 20 of them are in construction, 2 of them are in their end phase. We set a target of 25% of employment opportunities created during the construction and use phases for local residents at the start of it. We actively monitor our development pipeline. We engage early in the planning process, really, really key, engage at pre-app stage with developers, sit down and make employment a key part of the negotiations alongside affordable housing, infrastructure requirements. You know, I think it's fair to say skills and employment isn't really a natural sort of space for many developers, but that's fine because it is a natural space for us. So you know, that's where the sort of partnership approach can really work, and you can make your position very clear as to what you want in terms of your apprenticeships, what you want in terms of supporting employment opportunities for long-term unemployed people, how you want developers to engage with local young people, schools, colleges, and if you can't agree, or if for whatever reason the contractor can't meet your asks, there's a financial contribution that you can ask for that helps us then do some of that work for them. So that's the second, I suppose, really powerful lever that we as a local authority have to really optimize development opportunities. And a third one is a project. Really, it's not a policy or a sort of approach or a strategy. It's a project that I just want to tell you all about. The culture and creative industries are a huge part of our local economy. We are quite rightly very proud of them. They're a growth sector. They're in essence Lambeth's USP when it comes to our local economy. And for us, we don't just want to see the benefits of our cultural sector coming from tourism and hospitality. We recognise that the cultural economy can make a huge contribution to social regeneration, actually, and provide great life experiences. But we all know, I think, on this call that the culture and creative industries are not the most diverse industries. So we've got a dedicated program actually to tackle this, to connect our young people into the cultural sector and create more opportunities for people from diverse backgrounds. So there's a program called Elevate. Again, I'd encourage people to check it out. It's a great program. It was designed by local young people. There's about 11 or so local young people that really drove it for us. So we took a bit of a back seat, really. They brought together the community, they brought together schools, they brought together cultural organisations, both the bigger ones, so both, you know, the likes of the South Bank, National, etc., and the smaller organisations throughout the borough. And they've had some really good wins, actually. We've set up 5 girls clubs in Lambeth secondary schools involving industry mentoring to encourage more young women, particularly from a diverse background, to enter culture and creative sector. We've had the Old Vic providing 7 paid placements to 7 smaller organisations throughout the borough. So again, to spread the benefits of our bigger cultural institutions throughout the borough. They held a radical careers fair last year in a pop-up event space in the heart of Brixton. It was a careers fair for young people, held by young people, and trust me, it was completely different to what a normal careers fair, the ones that we tend to design and sort of front, looked at. Far more engaging, far more impactful, and a real example of the power of putting young people, and in particular the community, in charge of the services or the opportunities that they want to shape in future. So I'll end there, because those are three sort of very different examples of what I think are quite useful inclusive growth actions, policies, projects in action.
Three absolute nuggets of gold there, Nabeel. Thank you very much. Real gold dust stuff from all our panelists today. Some great ideas and great initiatives. Just to take the conversation forward, then, I know Nick's keen to address this issue. Well, we've got a number of different themes developing in the questions, but one in from Mark Bagent. When the level of unemployment is rising sharply, how should councils prioritise and target their limited resources for supporting individuals into employment and helping businesses recover and grow? What's the kind of prioritisation progress there? And just before I hand over to you, Nick, we've got Sean Kelly, we've got Colin Ross raising their hands in the audience. I'm very autocratic about how we run these webinars, I'm afraid, guys. If you could put your questions through the Q&A channels, we will address them if they're the most popular ones here and now, and if they're not, we'll address them by email and through social media channels later. But I'm not going to hand over the stage to anyone other than our panelists from whom we want to hear. Nick, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think Nabeel's spoken to this point to some extent already. We do need to be really intentional. So it's different for different local authorities. There is absolutely something that's situational, but I think generally kind of London's priorities, based on kind of the structural issues that we understood, but also some of the early data about the impact of COVID are quite clear, as in who is missing out and who will be most disadvantaged. So it is young people, it is individuals from BAME communities, it's older residents, it's women. Almost all of those groups are ones that we were kind of focused on prior to COVID, because they had kind of existing barriers to flourishing in the labour market. I think the role of local authorities needs to be thought about in the context of the investment that central government will make primarily through DWP and JCP. So a huge expansion in work coach capacity, the extension of the health and work programme, Kickstart. Our role, I think, should be around supporting those with more complex challenges to work. So young people should be a priority, because the risks of what labour market economists call scarring are so great when they enter a labour market that is on a significant downturn. They don't kind of acquire the work experience, the wage history, which sends a kind of clear signal to employers about their value in the labour market, and it can lead to problems around both employment and pay, which last 10 years. So getting those that group supported is really key. And then the health and disability employment gap in London is, extreme and already a source of kind of real concern. So I think we've got to be focused on those groups who we've already got some touch points with, who are kind of more complex. Colleagues in JCP have got to focus on those people who are likely to be unemployed for short periods of time, so long as demand in the economy starts to pick up. So I think intentionality is kind of a really important point.
Great, thanks, Nick, and delight to welcome our special guest this afternoon, Patsy Dell. Patsy, I'll come to you in a second, but just first, Joanne, the issue of prioritisation of support. How have you got anything to add to Nick's points?
I run the council housing service and temporary accommodation amongst my portfolio. So there's 20,000 residents already struggling on low incomes, many of whom have been furloughed and at risk. So we are rapidly looking at our service offer and upskilling our capacity to support people into employment. I think people mentioned the great work local government has done during the pandemic to reach out to residents and make connections with them, which really serves us well when we want to help and offer support to these groups of residents. So I'm focusing on my tenants and leaseholders in Enfield.
Great stuff, Joanne. And can you respond to Mark Jenkinson's question, maybe? How Enfield and the other panelists are adjusting procurement and contract management approaches to ensure that you take account of inclusion, sustainability, good growth, etc. And how are you monitoring that? So sure enough, the procurement has raised its head in the conversation as predicted.
So I don't know whether this is advertising, but we're working with the social value portal. And I think we've been using that for a while in terms of looking at evaluation of benefits we're getting, but we haven't looked very strategically about how corporately we should target social value outcomes. So we've been looking at that, and my view is that at the moment we should all be seeking employment and skills outcomes from our capital investment. So we've got a procurement board and we're having those discussions right now, and we're also, because we're a direct delivery organisation, we actually want contributions to our own skills academy, our own apprenticeship programmes, rather than replicating those of others. So it's a live issue for us at the moment, and we're trying to just kind of focus on quick wins and what we can achieve in the next year.
Thanks, Joanne. Jamie, in a circle, you're working with dozens of local authorities across the country. So, what's your perception of how support is being prioritised, of how procurement might be monitored in order to ensure that that inclusivity is built in, and also a question from David Hutt you might want to pick up on the balancing between the need for zero carbon growth and the costs and difficulties involved in ensuring that.
Yeah, thanks, Sophie. I mean, we're tackling huge issues here, aren't we? This is our challenge. We're going to draw them down. I think when you're tackling huge issues like this, I think it's really good to start with this idea of shared mission still. Yeah, and I know that's not in the detail, but if you have shared mission, then every single SME, registered provider, local institution is all aiming in the same direction. Yeah, and if you can, you're always going to have slightly different objectives, but where they overlap in the middle, if there's a big overlap, then you've got everybody going in the same direction. And I really think that is a really strong starting point. And the same thing, as Joanne said, you've got to run it down into your DNA, haven't you? And it's not just your DNA, but it's the DNA in all of the partnerships. At that stage, you're starting to give yourself some really clear focal points and some metrics and some measures by which to go at. And then that creates a framework for prioritizing activity. And you're not going to be able to do everything at all. Yeah, but there is definitely, in my view, there is a lot of value in going through that cascade process to try and understand where you're aiming, which initiative is aiming at what, and doing a relatively logical process of matching up initiative with priority. And I think the other way that councils, the very, very best councils, or that we're working with, they understand a portfolio of initiatives. They understand which initiative brings what value to what priority. So they don't try and load every initiative with trying to achieve everything, yeah, because that's the way to get stuck. Everybody's trying to, it happens with development sites or it happens with initiatives. Sometimes it's just a very narrow initiative that's having a very high impact on a very small number of people. And that is as valuable as a big project that is spread across. And people recognize that. And if you're able to align this mission with the way what you're trying to achieve, with a portfolio, with having it in the DNA, with the decision-making process, with alignment of these different projects, then it's great. And then you've got, the Bun Hill projects of circular economy. You've got, setting up a Be First, a massive delivery company. You've got some of the stuff that the colleagues are telling you. All of those slot together. So that's always our advice. Always, bring those things together. Then that begins to answer David's question, because of course it is an impossible square to circle in many individual cases. But if you are setting up a portfolio of projects and you are making it the mission of the providers to deliver zero carbon over a long period of time with the right amount of money that you're putting into it, with the learning loops set into it, and with building strong partnerships, then you can start to deploy some of the modern methods of construction. You can start to have trade-offs with slightly less affordable housing versus climate, mitigation, all those difficult decisions that no one likes to take. You can look at that across the portfolio with some partners that are there for the long time, and then you can chip away at this. But again, it's mission focused, innovation focused, and be willing to learn. And that's how we see it. And it's difficult, it's tough. Strong leadership, that is the way you carry it through.
And strong leadership. What a great place to end, and to introduce Patsy Dell at the Hertfordshire Growth Board, Director of Growth in Hertfordshire. Patsy, you've popped in to tell us about next week's session, and that's going to focus on the recovery plans in Hertfordshire across the county through the Growth Board there. What kind of role is inclusivity going to play in those plans outside London? We've had a very London focused conversation this morning.
Well, I think we echo a lot of the problems and issues that people have raised. I mean, across Hertfordshire, which many would think is a very prosperous sort of home county environment, we've got real inequalities across wealth, health, life outcomes, within a sort of 4 or 5 mile distance. So we really echo that, and we want to make community wealth building, inclusive growth a real golden thread, to use a kind of bit of an outdated term now, as part of all our programs. So if I could just give a plug for people who want to hear what we're doing next week on the webinar on the 13th, you'll hear from a few leaders from Hertfordshire, some of our anchor institutions, the university, talking about what we've been doing around recovery and looking forward, our place-based growth ambitions, economic performance support, and how community wealth building is a part of that process. So we look forward to seeing you next week.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you very much indeed, Patsy, and thanks to the panel as a whole. I think this thread of community wealth building, of inclusivity within growth is going to run, and we'll certainly do our bit at the Voice of Authority to weave that golden thread through all the conversations taking place over the coming weeks. But for now, what a fantastic contribution! Thank you so much for inspiring us, panel. You'd have to have a harder stone, I think, not to be stirred into some level of action by the passion and the intelligence and the excitement around some of the initiatives that you've discussed today. And I'm sure, audience, you will join me in saying thank you to Joanne Drew of the London Borough of Enfield, Nabeel Khan of the London Borough of Lambeth, and Nick Kimber of the London Borough of Camden, as well as Jamie Unan of Inner Circle Consulting, our sponsor today, without whose generosity and expertise this session wouldn't have been possible. Thanks also to Patsy for joining us at the end there, and thanks to you out there, audience, for your inquisitive, probing, challenging questions, and for contributing so much to the discussion at the end there. We will be putting your questions to the panel if they haven't yet been answered, so that discussion will continue, and we'll be circulating their responses to you through our social media channels. Join us again at 11 a.m. Next Thursday for the Hertfordshire Growth Board discussion. You can book your place for that, and you can watch the recordings or read the reports from this and all our other sessions at www.thevoiceofauthority.co.uk. Until then, from our panel and from me and from everyone at 3 Fox, thank you very much and good morning.